took it very hard. Apparently, he did make comments. Was it necessary to kill him? Because he was being treated real good.
Sarber dies later that night. Auburn, Indiana.
The aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, is on high alert as one of its attack jets prepares to take off from its flight deck.
It seemed business as usual. Everything was going the way it was supposed to go. Nothing seemed abnormal.
But what 20-year-old Petty Officer Mike McDonald is about to witness is anything but business as usual. It will forever change Navy operating procedures on board an aircraft carrier. Just seconds before takeoff, McDonald's best friend, 20-year-old Petty Officer J.D. Bridges, makes a disastrous mistake and gets sucked into the jet engine.
He got sucked in within a tenth of a second.
J.D. Bridges was checking to make sure the A-6 intruder jet was connected to the deck's catapult for launch. He gets too close to the engine and disappears in a terrifying split second.
Well, I knew immediately when it happened that he was gone. It happened so fast, it was like a rag doll getting pulled around a corner.
There's an analogy in real life that these engines are just like a vacuum cleaner sucking up a fly.
After 34 years of service, retired Rear Admiral Tim Beard knows just how dangerous JD's job could be.
You can see that you don't want to be close to this intake, but yet we have to have a petty officer down here actually doing the hookup and then exits so that he doesn't get close to that intake.
It's the most dangerous job in the world, I think. He was the guy that crawled under the aircraft in mill power. Mill power is when they're at full throttle, getting ready to get launched off the aircraft.
At full throttle, the intake engines of the 54-foot, 60,000-pound A-6 intruder generate 9,300 pounds of thrust. That's twice as strong as the most powerful tornado.
The engines in the intruder are about 8 to 9 feet aft of the entry to the intake. So you have this cavernous entry that a man can fit into very, very nicely. The reason for the length is to channel the flow so that you have smooth flow when it enters the front face of the engine.
JD had served in the U.S. Navy for more than 2.5 years and was just a few months shy of completing his tour of duty.
On that particular night, he was training another individual to do his job. So he was, watching over someone else.
JD makes the critical mistake when he moves in to check the trainee's work. The odds of surviving such an horrific accident are astronomical. But JD miraculously manages to crawl out alive. And believe it or not, a bandaged J.D. Bridges holds a news conference the very next day.
And I went under too far, out too far into the intake, and it sucked me in as far as I can remember. I stuck my arm up above my head after it pulled me in, and I hit my arm on something. I guess that held me from going any farther. And then all the air was rushing through the intake, and it was sucking my air. I couldn't get any air. And then I heard him shut down the engine. And I looked back, and I just started pulling myself out, and that's the last thing I remember.
Almost 17 years later, JD still looks at the tape like everyone else, in total disbelief.
The only thing I can see that saved my life was maybe God had a hold of my feet and wouldn't let me go yet.
JD's helmet was sucked completely off his head. Amazingly, investigators believe that is what saved his life.
The jet intake, it sucked off my helmet, my gloves, my goggles, and it chewed my float coat and shirt up from my waist down all the way around.
His helmet came off when he first went into the intake. That's what hit the engine first and made the engine explode and basically, shut down before he actually hit the blades of the engine.
JD's clothing was shredded into tiny pieces by the engine's razor-sharp blades.
With that much equipment going through the engine, it's quite possible that blades will start being shed out horizontally, and the engine may in fact seize.
Our look inside shows how JD escaped almost certain death. His helmet and gear jammed the engine. A split second later, JD's shoulder gets wedged against the nose cone in the center. Since the engine was slowed, there was not enough suction to pull him through, and JD was able to push himself back out.
If I wouldn't have got wedged into the side of the intake and the nose cone, it would probably spit me out the other end and chop me up into a little bit of nothing.
Luckily, the pilot thought he heard a noise. Mike saw it happen, but nobody else on deck even realized JD was gone.
At that exact moment when JD got sucked into the engine, the pilot shut down the engine. He heard something going, but he didn't know what. The flight deck crew basically got the aircraft ready to pull off the catapult and take it off the flight deck so they can launch another aircraft.
If my buddy Mike didn't see me get sucked into the jet, I might have been laying on the flight deck for an hour or two or run over by another jet before it was even noticed that I got sucked in.
Fortunately, Mike alerted his superior officer immediately. Within minutes, JD was safely carried away. He was beaten up, but alive.
The worst injuries I got was a broken collarbone. I've got a scar above my eye where a piece of steel cut me. I had a 1/4-inch piece of steel on my wrist, and I had a hole in my eardrum.
The Navy now uses this historic piece of tape to train sailors of what not to do on the flight deck. Today, from the deck of the USS Midway in San Diego, California, far from the battlefield, JD and Mike look back at that frightening moment and smile.
I'm amazed that it didn't kill me instantly or I was not chopped up into little pieces. I should not be here today doing this interview.
You can't really describe that feeling, watching him actually go through something like that and thinking they were gone or dead, and for them to be perfectly okay or to walk away from that type of accident is just, it's incredible.
The Oceanus is about to inscribe her name in the ship's log of history's greatest maritime disasters.
Can you help over?
The Greek luxury liner is crippled off the coast of South Africa. She is taking on water and sinking fast.